North or Verge. Okay. There's still people coming in, so let's just wait a minute.
Sure.
So Nora's got all the videos queued up, and she will share her screen, Gary, with everybody
Hmm.
and share the sound.
Okay.
So when you want one, you'll just tell her, and we'll play. And
Right.
when if you want to stop it somewhere, you just tell her to stop it. If you want
Okay.
to
Well,
go,
each one is actually fairly short, only it's like 3 minutes. So we'll probably just listen. I've figured it out. I've got, about 40 minutes of anecdotes and biography and about 20 minutes of music. So we'll still have 15, 20 minutes at the end of the hour for discussion, questions, that sort of thing.
oh, you prepared.
Unless I get carried away. But I've got a script here, sort of,
Oh, that's
to
great.
go to go by.
Oh, this is exciting. I said, well, then we'll let you talk, and at the end we'll do questions, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay. Okay, so it's 12:03. I don't see anybody popping in. Oh, Nora, I'm gonna make you host, co-host, whatever it's called. Where's Nora? There's Nora. Make co-host. Now, I think I'm cool till about 1:30. Then I got to run. You must have played at the Deer Head Inn, right?
Oh no, but I heard about it a lot.
Ah,
A lot of people played there through the years. I didn't know it's still going, but that's great that it is.
still going strong. And Bill Goodwin lives there, so he comes
Yeah,
down.
he used to talk about it all the time. He was in my band for about 5 or 6 years
Oh, wow.
back I would say in the late 70s, early 80s, around that time.
Has he lived there since then?
Kind of. He moved over, um, I think, first to New Hope and Pennsylvania. And that was he lived in LA when I hired him, and then he moved to New York when he joined my band. But he and his wife settled out in, like I say, in the Delaware Valley area there, and uh, and he played with Phil Woods for a lot of years, who
Oh,
also
yeah.
lived out there.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, there was a whole little Bob Duro
Mm-hmm.
also lived out there. There was a little musician community in that area. Well, we shouldn't get carried away
Yeah, right. We'll
with
save
that.
that'll be another
We got
topic.
more stories to talk about.
Yes. All right, so we can get started here. I just want to say, oh, one thing I will say, if anybody wants to buy a Love Vibe, Mark Cochran, who's on here, is selling a Love Vibe. So just keep that in mind. And most importantly, I'm glad you're willing to do all this because I can imagine all the stuff in your head. Some of it went into your book, and maybe we get some stuff not in the book, some stuff in the book, but this is like a real, I think, treat for all of us and an honor to be getting to listen to you tell these stories and just educate us, especially Red Norvo because we'll
Well, in my case, I actually knew pretty well all of the original vibraphone pioneers. Um, I was the next generation to follow them, so I got to know them personally. Some of them more closely than others. And I, like, for instance, and with Red, I didn't really talk about him much in my book. Maybe not, maybe hardly at all. Um, but among them all, I probably knew him the best. Had more interactions with him over the years. But let me just jump in, as they say online these days. Um, and there's some coincidences here. Uh, Red was born in 1908 in Illinois, and he died at age 91 in 1999. First coincidence, he was born the same year as Lionel Hampton. Second coincidence, he died the same year as Milt Jackson. Milt was 76 in 1999 and Red was 91. But I only discovered those coincidences when I did a little research um, about Red. And I saw the numbers and I said, wait a minute, that sounds familiar. I think that's Hamp's history also. And it turns out I was correct. He began playing marimba and xylophone. Of course, the vibraphone wasn't invented until about 1930. And he began his professional career in 1925 as a xylophonist and a marimbist. He would have been about 25 years old at the time. And he was married twice in his life. For a decade in the 1930s to singer Mildred Bailey. They went by the nickname of Mr. and Mrs. Swing. And they were one of the few interracial marriages of that era. So Red was kind of fearless and kind of an innovator throughout his life. Later, he was married to Eve Rogers, who was the sister of trumpet player Shorty Rogers, who you might have heard of, who was a major name in the West Coast jazz scene in the 1950s and 60s. They were a longtime couple, and Eve eventually died of cancer, I think in the 1960s, 70s or something, but that was his second wife. Uh, he started his career playing in uh, a he organized a marimba band, a bunch of marimba players, and he was the head of it. And they played the vaudeville theaters. Bear in mind that this was before there were movie theaters, or movie theaters were just beginning to exist. But the main public entertainment in the 1920s was either nightclubs or vaudeville theaters. And people put together acts that would last 20 minutes or so. And then they would be one of 10 acts that would play at the vaudeville theater. And that's what Red did with his marimba band. He got into jazz by 1930. And he stood out from the others as a xylophonist. He stood out from the other xylophone players of that era because he was more into jazz. The xylophone was actually pretty popular, and there were some big names in that era. Teddy Brown. There's some videos of him on YouTube. Harry Brewer lived in New York. George Hamilton Green and his brothers had a band. Uh, all popular xylophone performers. And Red stood out from among them because he was more into jazz. He improvised. The others tended to play more rehearsed pieces that they had written or worked out and then performed, repeatedly. His Let me see where I am here now. Yeah, here's a story about his stint with the Paul Whiteman Band. That was one of the first big bands that kind of alternated between jazz and commercial. In fact, it was the first band that performed Gershwin's Rhapsody in Blue in 1925. So got the job playing with the Paul Whiteman Band. And he told me that he didn't actually play that many pieces with the band. His main job was to go around the ballroom when they took intermissions. Now, bear in mind that jazz didn't appear in concert halls in that era. That had not, they were all, if you were a jazz band, you either played in a club, and that usually meant a smaller band, although not always, or you played in ballrooms, which were, plentiful. And so that's where Paul Whiteman was playing. And Red would roll his xylophone from table to table and play a tune for that table while they had their dinner and their drinks. And then he would roll to the next table and play. Such was the life of the xylophone player in the early days. Um, by the 30s, he had become pretty established. He'd married Mildred Bailey, and they were working together often. He made some consequential recordings in the early 30s. In 1933, and remember, in those days, it was you made two tracks, an A side and a B side of a 78 RPM disc. So you would get hired to make two songs. And he got hired. He made two original xylophone pieces, Knocking on Wood and Hole in the Wall, which are still kind of popular to this day. You can buy sheet music for them, I believe. Uh, and they went so well when they were released that the record company commissioned him to record two more tracks. Uh, as it happened, the label owner was out of town at that time, and Red led the sessions on his own. He recorded two pieces on marimba this time. And instead of the lively, novelty sounding xylophone pieces, they were quieter, subjective pieces. Um, and he had an interesting ensemble. Benny Goodman, who was a clarinet player, but only playing bass clarinet on this record. Um, and there was a bass player that you can't even hear on the record because recording abilities in that era were so poor. I mean, the microphone was only invented in 1925 and was still a very primitive technology. And there was a drummer as well. And the two pieces that he recorded, one was an arrangement that he did of Bix Beiderbecke's kind of famous song called In a Mist. And then he also did original, his own piece called Dance of the Octopus. And when the record company guy got back and heard the tracks, he was furious because they were so different than Red's first records. And in fact, he refused to release it for a year or two. But finally did, and that record is now considered one of the breakthrough, most contemporary and adventurous of jazz compositions and jazz recordings of the early 1930s. It's you mentioned in jazz history books occasionally, and so on. So we're going to listen to "Dance of the Octopus." This was the fourth track that I sent. So if you would play "Dance of the Octopus," uh, take a listen.
Share your screen, Nora. You know what you're doing. I'll just be quiet.
Yeah, that's it. We're not hearing anything.
Do you hear it, Nora? Okay. And meanwhile, I'm going to pull it up as well. We'll get it. Are you good? You good, Nora? You want me to try it? Okay. I think you want me to try
Can
it.
you try? I don't know why it won't let me share my sound. My bad.
That's all right. Oh, no way. There's a multiple participants can share advanced sharing options. Sorry, Gary, this has never happened before.
Oh,
Hosting link.
okay.
Who can share at the same time? All participants? No. One participant can share at a time. That's what I did. All right, Gary, you want to keep talking and I'll try to figure
Okay,
this out.
I'll keep talking. Okay. Um, Red was very capable of playing with both either two mallets or four mallets. And you'll notice, of course, if we get to hear this track, that he's playing four mallets on the marimba. Fairly complicated sticking and all. In fact, I recorded this exact arrangement in a tribute to Red around 2002 or something like that, when I did a record that was a tribute to my favorite vibraphone players. And I actually transcribed it off the record and played it as he played it. And I had to tell you, some of the sticking on the things were fairly tricky. I had gained a lot of respect for his technical capabilities. And let's see where we are here. He decided to switch to the vibraphone in 1943. There it is. Go ahead and play it.
Build a website you love.
Okay. Can you hear me again?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see where I'm at here. Well, he switched to vibraphone in 1943. Another coincidence. That was the year I was born. Just a coincidence. And he settled on playing with just two mallets. He told me years later when we became friends, said that everyone else was playing with two at that time. So he thought he should just go along with the trend. So he kind of gave up playing with four. Although one of the examples we're going to check out later on here, he does some comping with four mallets, which he didn't do much of normally. But he was primarily a two mallet player. He's generally thought of as a sort of a middle of the road musician these days, stylistically, but he was willing to try new things. When bebop came along on the scene in the mid 1940s, he was quoted as saying that something new was going on, and I figured I should try it out. So, in fact, he put together, under his own leadership, a recording session with Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. A real mismatch stylistically, frankly, from where Red was at, right in the swing era of music. And the record actually was not very successful musically speaking because of the fact that they really weren't on the same page. But you have to give Red an A for effort for trying to collaborate with the new things that were coming along in jazz. Now, the next big breakout for him came in the late 40s, like between, say, 48, 49, and 1953. He was working mostly in New York at the time, club work. In fact, there was no concert work for jazz yet in that era. It was all clubs. And he was playing with a small combo around New York, and sometimes as many as 5 or 6 musicians in the group. Um, he discovered a new young guitarist who was filling in for his usual guitarist for a week or two, and the new guy's name was Tal Farlow. And at that time, Red was thinking about relocating to Los Angeles, which was kind of a daring move in that era. Most of the jazz scene was in New York, and only a few early arrivals had made the trip to LA and started building a small jazz scene. There weren't very few clubs, very few places to play in LA. So it only kind of worked if you could play and work in studios or if you were touring a lot. So you weren't dependent on local places to play because LA didn't have much in the way of local venues. But he asked Tal Farlow to come with him. He said, I don't have any gigs booked. I don't even have a band organized or anything, but I'd like you to be part of it if you're willing. So Tal agreed, and they both went to LA. And Red decided, for economic reasons, he said he felt he had trouble breaking even, having bands with 4, 5, and 6 people. So he decided to make it a trio, just vibes, guitar, and bass. And he looked around to find, he had the guitar player with him, but he looked around to find a bass player. And somebody told him that Charles Mingus had moved to LA, and that instead of playing around town, he was actually working at the post office. So Red said that he got the phone book out and looked up the addresses of all the post office branches in LA and started driving around one day, asking at each one, does a guy named Charles Mingus work here? And he said halfway through the afternoon, he found him. So they had a little conversation in the parking lot. Red told him about his idea for a trio. Mingus said yes, and they had a band. And this group was considered a really hot thing in that for about 3 or 4 years. They made 2 records between 1951 and 53. This was at the beginning of actual albums. Around the beginning of the 50s is when recording went from 78 RPM singles to 33 RPM albums. So they were new in that new recording format. And we're going to listen to one of those tracks next. These 3 players, they were famous for their kind of fast-moving, complex arrangements. And they also they were proud of the fact that nothing was written down. They worked up their arrangements all just in rehearsal. We used to call that head arrangements. That was the name for that. So when you didn't read music, you just played, whatever you made it up in rehearsals, you remember it, and the group would play that way. And that was a fairly common approach to bands in that era. In fact, the modern jazz quartet, and most people don't realize that they were very poor readers. In fact, Milt Jackson didn't read at all and refused to. And the other guys were not very good readers either. They learned everything by rote in lengthy rehearsals. Even though they were playing these classical themes and so on, you would have thought that they were well trained in classical music or something to do that, but that wasn't the case with them. Well, let's listen to this track. I think it's called Back Home Again in Indiana. Oh no, it's not Indiana. It's something else. But I get a kick out of you. That's what it is.
Right one, go.
But
No.
that's. Okay. Now he is playing with four mallets at this time still. He's only been playing the vibes for what 6, 7 years at this point. But I noticed there he's comping in with four mallets. He's comping in closed four note chords. He's not doing it in the more modern style, the way we comp on the vibraphone today. Um, but at that point, he was really the only vibist playing with four mallets anyway. So he was kind of on his own in terms of figuring out how to do it. Um, Now, a little side story about Tal Farlow, the guitarist. He married the ex-wife of one of the composers of the Broadway shows, My Fair Lady and Camelot and so on. I forget whether it was Lerner and Lowe. I don't know which one it was that he married, but he became wealthy and they lived in a sort of a mansion in New Jersey. And Tal, for about 20 years, retired from playing, but then came back and started playing with Red again for another decade or so. I actually met him finally once on a jazz cruise crossing the Atlantic and got to hear him play. His playing was not that great at this point. The curious thing was that this very steady, fast time that he had on this record, for instance, he was not able to play really real steady tempo anymore. So something had kind of escaped, I guess, during his retirement period or as he got older. Um, well, let me move on. In the decades that followed, Red played with a great variety of famous leaders and led bands of his own. My first opportunity to hear Red in person came in 1963 when I was 19 years old and touring with George Shearing's quintet. We traveled in those days by car and truck. 8 people distributed between a panel truck with the equipment in it and a Cadillac Fleetwood, which the rest of us all rode in. And we didn't fly from city to city because we'd play 2 weeks or a month in each city in a club. And so when it came time to switch cities, we would usually drive all night, straight through, uh, maybe 24 or 36 hours to get from LA to Denver or to Chicago or something. So one night we were leaving LA, driving, I think, to Denver, and we happened to pass through Las Vegas at about 2 in the morning. And someone said, "Hey, look, there's a sign there. Um, Red Norvo's playing at this big hotel. Maybe we should stop, get something to eat, and check out Red's band." So we did. So it was this, most kind of surrealistic experience for me at 2 in the morning in the middle of a long drive to walk into this hotel, into this, dining room and with the band playing. There was Red Norvo with the guitarist and the pianist and a quintet, I think it was. We listened to a set, had something to eat, and then got back in the car and drove on to Denver. And years later, I still remembered that as my first, in-person viewing of Red. I didn't actually even speak to him or anything. We just heard the band and got up and left and drove on. But he was a guest player in a lot of bands, from Benny Goodman, Woody Herman, others, and he also fronted for vocalists a lot. He would organize a quintet or so and accompany Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Dinah Shore. There were 3 singers that he worked with during that era. Um, he had a unique style. He had used a light touch on the keyboard, and I think that came from his beginnings as a xylophone player, which you play very lightly with hard mallets. But with the vibraphone, most of us dig in more to get a more bell-like ring out of the keys. Red continued to have a light touch, and he had this kind of to me an unnerving habit when he played. Um, he didn't look at the instrument. He looked straight out at the audience while he's playing, and instead of down at the keys. Um, and maybe the audience didn't really think anything about that, but to me it looked strange because, after all, most of us we at least keep an eye on what's going on down there on the keys. And but Red, he was checking out the audience at all times, smiling as well. We're gonna. Oh, I should tell you about his slap mallets. He invented a kind of substitute mallet, a little leather pouch full of sand that was attached to a stick. And he would hit the keys with that, and he would get kind of a swooshing sound instead of a soft slapping sound. Um, and that became one of his trademarks. He would always play one or two tunes in every set using the Red Norvo slap mallets. I don't have a recorded example of that for you today, but I thought I'd mention it because it was one of the original things that he came up with. We're going to listen to now a piece called There'll Never Be Another You. This is a recording from 1985. I will point out that by this time, Red was practically deaf. He could hardly hear at all. And after we listen to this track, I'll tell you more about that, because by then I knew him well, and we even did a tour together, which was where I learned more about how he dealt with not being able to actually hear, and still kept playing gigs. This track is from 1985. It's with pianist Dick Hyman, bassist Slam Stewart, and the drummer is Louis Belson, an all-star lineup of players. And you'll notice at the end that they don't go back and play the melody chorus again to end it. And Red is the only one that solos. And he eventually looks over at Dick Hyman at the piano to kind of give him the cue that this is the last chorus, so we should get ready to play the ending when we get to the end of this song. But they didn't go back in the usual jazz style and play the melody chorus again. So here's There'll Never Be Another You.
Here's another Goodman alumnus, a virtuoso of the vibraharp, Red Norvo.
Okay. Now, as I pointed out, at this point, Reb was pretty much deaf, and yet I discovered this because we did a tour together in. I had made an estimate here of when that was. Um, Somewhere around the early 80s or so. And he told me he started losing his hearing in his 60s. And he said that by the time he and I were talking about it, he said that he in one ear he couldn't even hear a dial tone from a telephone. In the other ear, all he could hear was the bass. So when we did this tour together, we had never played together except a jam session at Newport Jazz Festival, which we're going to get to at the last here. But we didn't rehearse. We got to this was a European tour, started up in northern England somewhere at a big ballroom. And in the dressing room, I said, "Well, what shall we play at the end? We were each going to play on our own, and then double up and play, a couple of pieces together at the end." And then that's when he had to explain to me that he couldn't really hear anything but the bass. So what he did was he listened to the bass player's notes so that he could stay in tempo with the band, and usually he could tell where they were in the changes as well. So occasionally he would get off, and the band would have to adjust to where he was because he was going from memory essentially, and he continued playing that way really until he had a stroke, which finally made it impossible for him to play. He lost the use of his left arm, and by that time he was, I'm going to say, in his 70s, and a lot had changed in his life. His wife had died of cancer, and because of his hearing, he decided to retire, and that lasted a couple of years. But he said he was bored to death living in somewhere in Colorado near one of his old musician friends. So he said he's got to get back to playing, however I manage it. So he started working again, and then another tragedy happened in his life. Red was a gun collector, an odd hobby for a musician, but he liked going shooting. And he talked about that from time to time when we were riding around on buses on tour. That he liked hunting for like rabbits and things, small animals, that sort of thing, and he liked shooting. His son killed himself with one of Red's guns, which was like just another tragedy that struck his life at about that same era. He also had a daughter who did stay with him to the end. He lived with his daughter in Santa Monica until his late 80s, and then he ended up in a care home for the last few years of his life. But let me see. I wanted to see if I had anything else I wanted to say here. Yeah, he had his stroke and couldn't play. He was very frustrated. He's about missing music. He got himself a digital keyboard so that he could mess around with writing songs with his right hand, playing things. And he liked to go out when anybody he knew played in town in Los Angeles. His daughter would bring him to see the gig. So I saw him several more times after that. And then the last time I saw him, we was on a jazz cruise in the Caribbean. And the theme of that cruise that year was featuring the vibraphone. So there was Milt Jackson, Terry Gibbs, Lionel Hampton, me, and a guy named John Campbell. You probably wouldn't know, was a piano player who also doubled on vibes. So there were actually 5 of us played vibes. And Red was invited along on that cruise just as a guest because of his fame in jazz history. And the night that we all played on stage, one after another, Terry Gibbs got Red to come up out of the audience and play one song with just his right hand. He played "When You're Smiling," just the melody, and then a chorus or two of one one hand, very light soloing. It's one of the sweetest moments I've ever experienced in my musical life. And I was so happy to actually be there to see it. And it was wonderful for Red to be around all the players again and kind of relive his great lengthy career. Now we're going to close with a piece from 1968. This is a vibraphone summit that was at the Newport Jazz Festival. That was Lionel Hampton, me, Red, Milt Jackson, and Bobby Hutcherson. For me, those were the five important players of the time. And we each played a couple of pieces with either my quartet's rhythm section or a trio led by Billy Taylor. The example that you're going to see is me and Red playing with my band, with Roy Haynes, and Steve Swallow, and Jerry Hahn, the guitar player. We're going to play Back Home Again in Indiana. And after we each played separately, they put all five vibraphones out on the big stage at the Newport Festival, and we all together, all five of us, played Hamp's Blues and Flying Home. And it was insane. I mean, the thought of five vibraphones all banging away together at the same time was ridiculous, musically speaking, but there was some incredible energy to it. And to this day, well, until I retired from traveling around, people would walk up to me and say, I was there that afternoon when you guys played all those vibraphones. It was amazing, the most amazing thing I've ever seen, and so on. I don't know. To me, I was laughing all the way through those last two numbers. It made no sense at all. But it was great seeing all of us out there banging away together. So here it is. This is Back Home Again in Indiana. In fact, I keep trying to announce that from the Vibraphone Summit in Newport, 1968. Okay, that's it.
Wow. Well, that's great. We got one question in the chat, and Dr. Bob has his hands up. But I was excited. Uh, do you like? I imagine you do. Dick Hyman. He's an amazing piano player.
He was an amazing piano player. I'd say was. I don't know if he's still around or not. Maybe he is. He'd be pretty old. Um, he was the kind of guy who played with all kinds of different people. Never had his own bands or that sort of thing. He was like a hired gun in a way. I played with a lot of different players during that era. And I was on a cruise with him once, and I saw him in one of the empty nightclubs during the morning. He was readings and playing some really intricate exercises or something, uh, some kind of contemporary atonal classical stuff. And I'm watching them for about 5 or 10 minutes, and I'm thinking, Jesus, what is this music he's playing? And I kind of snuck up to look over his shoulder to see what he was reading, and he was reading the New York Times. Uh, he was actually These were exercises that he did, I guess, every day of keeping his fingers nimble. So the word I'm trying to think of. Anyway, I had a big laugh about that when I saw. I didn't let on to him that I was, caught off guard or anything. But yeah, quite a player.
Yeah, he's on that Maybach piano series. You know
Aha.
that
Yes.
he's astounding. But all right, let me see
Yeah.
here. Let's get to these questions. Vince asked. He noted Red is sort of considered a middle of the road vibist. I don't hear him this way. He sounds wonderful and adventurous. I especially admire his trio work. What do you think is responsible for this perception of Red as not a top tier vibist?
Oh, well, I wouldn't say he wasn't top tier, as he wasn't as contemporary. He played standards. He didn't very there, the only originals he did were back in his xylophone days. But as a jazz player, he did this kind of standard thing. He'd play the melody of the standard. He'd improvise a chorus or two. The other guys would play a chorus or two, and then they would play the melody again and take it out. He didn't venture beyond that format. He didn't do projects with orchestras or symphonies or other kinds of styles of jazz or whatever. So in that sense, when I say he was kind of middle of the road, he was stylistically in the center lane, where most jazz of his era was played. If you think of somebody who is very much the opposite of that, you would think of Miles Davis, who had group after group that sort of broke new ground in terms of musical types of styles and types of compositions and instrumental settings and so on. That Red's two big breakout moments were his 1933 marimba recordings that I played you, and his early 1950s trio recording with Mingus and Tal Farlow. That was when he was at his most innovative. But of course, he's one of my favorites. He was also a good friend over the years.
Well, Dr. Bob, he's our resident vibraphone shrink, by the way. So if you have any problems, he can stay on after for 150 an hour, right?
200.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Gary.
Hi.
I wanted to make a comment, and that is that, in any profession, I'm not just talking about music, I'm talking about music, medicine, business, whatever, there's a tendency for younger people in the profession, people who are like getting started and gaining momentum, to, hold the older people, they feel competitive with them, and may even try to distance themselves from the older crowd, um, um, it's kind of like an adolescent, reacting
Mhm.
towards a parent, that sort of thing. But what I've seen here is like you were so kind and interested, in Red. And it must have meant so much to Red uh, for you, here's this young guy with fabulous technique, paying attention to me, I mean, and that must have made him feel really special, so that was a really, really kind thing to do.
Let me answer that a little bit because I'll tell you, among musicians, that competition thing is more minimal than maybe in other professions. And I've had people point this out to me. For instance, a friend who had several actors in her family. She said, "Wow, I look at you musicians, and you all get on so well together, and you you know, young, old, you all seem to, uh, you know." Go back and forth, helping each other and praising each other, and so on. So actors are so competitive; they'll do anything to uh, sandbag a fellow actor on the stage, upstage them, take over the spotlight and so on. They're merciless, uh, and so on. And there is something about uh, in music, especially in jazz music, I think. Uh, the older jazz musicians feel a real push to help the younger players along. Anytime you see somebody with talent, you want to give them good advice and answer their questions and recommend them to people and so on. You feel it's part of carrying on this tradition that we're all part of. It is an ongoing continuum, after all. And I certainly felt that compulsion as an older player as I've aged of wanting to reach out to younger players that I've gotten to acquainted with and so on. And people helped me along the way. They were supportive and kind and helpful and recommended me for things and brought me in on things. Um, I think it's certainly what you saw in that clip. I was 25 years old at that particular time in history. I had been a band leader for 1 year at that point, and there was Red, who was one of my heroes. And I knew at the time that I had more facility than he did, that I had more technique on the instrument, but um, but my respect for him was, huge because of the contributions he had made that, in a way, made me possible. Uh, we're all borrowing from what those who came before, the inroads that they've made. So uh, I think uh, in the case of jazz musicians, especially, it's more that way than competitiveness.
Well, that's very interesting. I learned something. And just the second comment was when I was in high school, I had um, a teacher, and he has a set of vibes, and I had been studying drums with him, and so I started playing the vibes. And he said, um, he said, "There's this guy you got to go see. He plays with four of these things, and he's doing a clinic at Frank's Drum Shop."
Mm.
And so on a Saturday morning, my dad, I was like 14 or 15 at the time. And so my dad drove me down to Chicago, and we go into Frank's Drum Shop, and I had never been in the place, and the place was packed. And then on the wall were all these mallets, and I did see a set of slap mallets for sale, and I couldn't figure out what they were. And then my dad, knowing that I was a little shy, he just pushed me right up to the front. And then that was the first time I saw you.
Ah,
Uh, and I was about 9 inches away from your low F sharp, and I'm going, what the hell is he doing? And And well, anyway, that's when I first saw you.
Well, I can tell you, I actually remember that time because Frank's drum shop was famous, and I knew Frank um, uh, at that time, and it was my one time to do this workshop, this clinic event in the actual famous, infamous Frank's drum shop. So I still remember doing that. I don't remember you, of course, but I still remember that occasion, that event.
Wow.
Well, thank you for years and years of wonderful music.
Thank you. You're very welcome.
So I got a question. You can tell me if I'm wrong. I understood that the xylophone thing lasted about 10 years, and these guys were kind of like rock stars. And then recording changed, and other instruments could be heard. And with it, like overnight, they were done. Is that accurate?
Pretty much. No famous xylophonist of the 20s, which was its big era, right there, from 1915 to 1930. Uh, and it flamed out surprisingly quick. And by the time I started playing let's say I was 6 years old, I was 1949. But even by then, the xylophone was off the scene. I was introduced to the marimba and the vibraphone. Also, you noticed that uh, on the recordings, on the videos, that they introduced Red as playing the vibraharp in one of the things. That was 1985, actually. And um, in fact, when I first started playing, they were called the vibraharp.
Right.
I didn't hear the word vibraphone until I don't know, maybe I was in my 30s or something. Um, the instrument companies made them and gave them the name. There were in the earliest days there were two or three other names for metal mallet instruments, but the Deegan company settled on vibraharp as its trademark name, and the Musser company, which of course was started by Claire Musser, who used to work for Deegan. And he was the Deegan plant manager, and then he started his own company in around the late 40s, I suppose. And so they were still calling it the Vibra Harp. And I don't know when it changed to vibraphone. It wasn't one of the companies. I think it just in all the foreign places I went to on tour, it was called the vibraphone. It was called, they, in Europe and so on, they already were calling it the vibraphone. And somehow the instrument companies here in the US eventually quietly changed the name to vibraphone. But I can't tell you exactly when it happened, maybe the 1950s to 60s or somewhere in there. The old Vibra harp name went away. And I was glad because people kept thinking when I would say I play the Vibra harp that I played some kind of stringed harp instrument. And I'm no, I'm trying to show them that I play something else. Still, nobody knows what the vibraphone is. And I'll tell you my Milt Jackson story. Well, now that I've brought the subject up, I saw him one day with this little pin on his lapel, a little tiny vibraphone pin. And I said to him, "Wow, man, that's really cute. Where'd you get that?" And he looked at me very gruffly and said, "I got that so when someone says, 'What's a vibraphone?' I can just point to it
That's
because
great.
I'm so tired of having to explain what it is." And I said, "It's amazing. I mean, I've been playing this instrument for 60 years or whatever. And to this day, I dread, meeting somebody new and they say, 'Oh, what do you do?' I said, 'Well, I'm a musician.' 'Oh, what instrument do you play?' And I take a deep breath and I say, 'The vibraphone.' And 9 out of 10 times they will say, 'What's that?' And then I used to say it's what Lionel Hampton plays, but nobody remembers him at this point.
Yeah.
And so now I say it's like a xylophone, and I wave my hands, and about half of people don't know what a xylophone is either. So at that point, I give up.
You said somebody came up to you one time and said, You play so fast, sometimes it looks like you're playing with four mallets.
Yeah, that was at a concert in New York at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And the stagehand who pulled the curtains up and closed the curtains. When I finished the concert, he said, "Wow, sometimes it looks like you got two of those things in each hand." That's what he said. So I didn't even know what to say to him.
No, that's right. Mark, you got a question?
Yeah, actually, a comment and three quick questions. The first, a comment.
Oh,
I appreciate Gary your comments about older jazz musicians in particular, and their generosity, and would like to just note that you and Tony are two of the most generous musicians that I've ever come across, and both of you have this uncanny and not unique but rare ability to reach your students and your audience on their level. So thank you both.
Hmm.
thank you.
And now the questions. Do you remember part of that generosity? Do you remember in the late 70s, a gig at Diamond Jim's on 9th Street Pier in Cleveland, Ohio? And you had call it a warm-up act. I think the guy's name was Happy Jack Feeder.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. I was just
That
going to
that
say,
impressed me too, that you were bringing along, what would you call him, a juggler?
yes, he was a very talented contemporary juggler. He didn't do the usual juggling tricks. He had invented other things, and he did a lot of it to music
Right.
as
Yeah, I
well.
remember music and strobe
Yeah,
lights. Yeah.
and I found him at a college date in Montana, and he was local. He lived in Bozeman, Montana, and they
Huh.
had hired him to do a set before they brought our band on. And I was fascinated with uh, his show. Uh, the music track and him by himself doing these
Yeah.
tricks. And so I got the idea. I said, it wouldn't cost much for me to just bring him on some of the tours with us as an opening act. And who doesn't enjoy a juggler?
Yeah.
It might loosen up the audience and make them, like Johnny Carson always had somebody come out and tell jokes for a half an hour before the show started to get them in a lively mood. So for about a year, Happy traveled with us, and then he moved back to Montana and opened a bakery. So
Well,
I,
40
I hear
years
from him
later,
every now and then.
40
Go
years
ahead.
later, I remember that, and in particular remember that as an example of your generosity in
Uh,
promoting other artists. So, and the next questions regarding naming. Do you remember a master class at Berkeley, probably in the mid '80s, and you told us about a presentation you had done, I think, at a grade school, when you asked the students, "Do you know what this is?" And I think some young boy, like a third grader, raised his hand and said, "It's a chromosome."
I don't remember that,
Yeah.
but
And
that's pretty
regarding
good.
naming, I have never heard anyone discuss this. Does it occur to anybody that our instrument is misnamed? We do not have vibrato. We have something
Yes,
more akin to
tremolo.
tremolo, right?
Yes.
And how would you feel if we changed the name to tremolophone?
Well, it doesn't roll off the tongue that well. That's people have asked me this before, and I've even thought about it because I always often point out to people it's not a vibrato, where the pitch goes up and down. It's a tremolo officially, but the tremolo phone just somehow sounds, like an Italian circus act of some kind. So,
Good.
so I think we're stuck with vibraphone.
I'm okay with that.
Okay,
Thank you.
sure. Anyone else? Oh, Richard something, so I can't see it over there.
Which?
Richard Schweiger.
Oh, he has a
Oh, you're
question?
you're muted. You're muted, Richard.
How's that?
Yeah.
I first met you going to Boston University, 1976 and 77, and you played at every jazz club almost every week. And everyone in the percussion department would go down and watch you. They gave student discounts. It was a couple of dollars. And later on, you came and played in California at the Vibe Summit with the LA Jazz Society. And
Mhm.
I had the honor of performing for you, Blue and Green. And then at the end of it, I had said to everyone that when I was going to Boston University, everyone in the percussion department had a saying, an hour with the living Burton was worth 100 hours of practice. And it was true. We love
That's
you.
that's pretty good. Thank you. I do remember the LA percussions. That was the tribute to Larry Bunker, I think, that you're
Well,
talking
no, it
about.
was your own. We were honoring you that year, and we had
Oh,
honored
okay.
everyone, from Cal Tjader was number one, and then there was Lionel Hampton, and just down the road, all
I
the great
see.
vibes players.
Oh, okay.
It's been a highlight of my life forever. And when you came, it really was the epitome of meeting you and seeing and playing for you. So I love you as a vibraphonist.
Thank you very much.
Anything else, or we can wrap up? I mean, I was taking notes, and I'll run all your stuff
John,
through AI and make a whole pre. Oh,
okay.
yeah, go
John
ahead.
Keene.
Oh,
Hey, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, Gary, this is a technical question. Regarding that last video, I noticed that the swing arc that Red Norvo uses is not real, just a couple of inches. Could that be because he's using cord wound mallets as opposed to yarn wound?
No, it's because he still played the same technique that he used on xylophone, where instead of using the weight of the mallet ball, which in order to get more of a power in your attack, you can't be you can't be halfway up the handle. You have to be back away from it to get more power in the swing. But for xylophone, you want to just almost drop the mallets on the keys to get a very light touch. And Red always played, always noticed that about his vibraphone playing, that the way he held his mallets, it was clearly his early xylophone playing had carried on for him. I'm pretty sure it had no difference in the wrapping of the yarn.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
um, one more question, or we can wrap it up.
Tony, are you switching the vibe hang to the second Sunday of the month, or
No, I'm just switching it to when I don't have gigs and conflicts.
okay,
It
but
was
you'll keep
great.
it.
I try to keep it the first week of the month, but the last couple I was working, and I thought, all right, well, let's do it this weekend. And I have help. I have Nora, who's one of my great students. I love Nora at Temple, and Nick, who couldn't be here today. They help out, and we prepare stuff. In fact, the whole department, we're trying to prepare something for one of these where I get all my students to talk about a not so well-known vibe player. But yes, the first of the week is what I try to do, but I've been just too busy lately.
Sure, just
Yeah.
keep us posted.
Yeah, try to send out the newsletter, and I post on the Vibes Workshop forum on Facebook. And I know maybe I can talk Gary into doing another couple of these, and I know he's got lots of stories and he knew everybody, so I'd like to hear, your take. You mentioned Milt Jackson, and
Yeah, I would do Milt next
okay, well, we'll
one of
set
these
that.
times. So we'll set that up
I
in the
love it,
future.
and you're giving it back, like you said. Older vibe players giving it back to younger. You've got 43 mixed age vibe players here. A lot of older ones, but you've got some younger ones too. So I think that's great, and I really appreciate you doing this. It really means a lot to me.
Well, you're all very welcome.
Yeah, I wish you could. I wish you could see the Mallet Research Center. It is so amazing.
I've looked at pictures and read their website and the college's website and so on. So we'll talk about that some more. Maybe I'll come up at some point.
Woo! That'd be great. That would be great. All right, everybody. So we'll end it here, and I'll see everybody next month. All
Thank
right.
you, Gary.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Yep.
Good job, Tony.
Hey.